On Friday, the new Online Safety Act came into force in the UK. Introduced by the Tories in 2023, the bill, as it was then, brings in compulsory age verification checks for online content that the government believes could be harmful to children. That includes pornography of all kinds, as well as material that relates to self-harm, eating disorders, or suicide. But one consequence of the Act is that content that almost certainly shouldn't have been censored has been. Earlier this year, Tory MP Katie Lamb made a speech in Parliament about child sexual exploitation. In it, she gave some graphic details of the ordeals young girls had undergone. But footage of that speech was briefly disappeared from X after the Act came into force. The Wikimedia Foundation, the non-profit that operates Wikipedia, is challenging the law, arguing that regulations endanger Wikipedia and the global volunteer contributors who create the site's pages, often anonymously. And also last week, footage of protesters being arrested by police outside a hotel housing asylum seekers in Leeds also appeared to be blocked on X. Now, look, I think when it comes to X, given Elon Musk's previous political statements, it wouldn't be at all surprising to find that the platform was overzealously applying the law in order to flame anti-government sentiment amongst its users. But if that's true, it also just shows how susceptible the law is to manipulation by big tech firms. Now, in response to the law, Brits have been downloading VPNs in massive numbers. That allows them to bypass UK verification checks by making it appear that they're accessing sites from outside the UK. 5 VPNs are amongst the top 10 apps being downloaded from the Apple Store in the UK right now. But according to one caller to LBC, the use of VPNs can bring their own privacy concerns.
What will happen is scenarios previously where these children were visiting things in the open and could be tracked are now being obfuscated through things like VPNs and other programs such as this that will be offered by states such as China, Russia, and our children will be routed through these because the UK government doesn't control the internet. It controls some of the internet, but it's a worldwide platform. They are putting all of their unencrypted information through those pipelines. That could be passwords, usernames, information about their personal life, alcoholism, pornography, all these kinds of things that could be used to control them and manipulate them. These are all being routed through actors who do not have our state interest at heart. I cannot believe this got through the intelligence services oversight.
Right. I mean, I'm not wanting to offend you. I can't believe you're right because it did.
I can't really believe what you're telling me because surely the state would just protect us at every turn. It's really hard for me to believe that the state wouldn't protect us or might make an error that made things harder for us. I mean, look, I know James O'Brien laughed at the end there. I think he was kind of speaking tongue in cheek, but it is a sort of classic kind of liberal sentiment that, it can't happen to us. We're a really advanced and progressive democracy, a liberal democracy. Now, a large factor behind the introduction of the bill by the Tories was the tragic death of London teenager Molly Russell. The 14-year-old took her life after being exposed to a stream of dark, depressing content on Pinterest and Instagram, with an inquest later ruling that she ended her life while suffering from depression and the negative effects of online content. Many online platforms have since said they've developed online tools to limit access to harmful material. But, come on. If you're like me, someone who uses a lot of those platforms that algorithmically select content, you'll know that just a few clicks out of curiosity can still lead you to being suddenly flooded with waves of very bleak material or otherwise unwanted material. And I think that there's also no doubt that pornography is having an insidious effect on young boys and therefore on young girls too. Ofcom recently found that 8% of children aged 8 to 14 had visited an online pornography site or app over a month-long period. So look, it isn't like there aren't problems to be solved here when it comes to the protection of young people. The question is whether this bill is the right tool for the job. Earlier today, I spoke to Dr. Kate Sim. She specializes in children's online protection. She is also the Program Director of Children's Online Safety and Privacy Research, or COPSA, at the University of Western Australia. And I began by asking her whether trading adult users' privacy for online child safety was worth it.
Yeah, so the question, and I think the common narrative when it comes to this act, the Online Safety Act, is that it's a fight between children's safety versus adults' privacy. And I really take issue with that. And I'm coming at it from as somebody who has been researching the intersection of sexual violence and technology for over a decade. And I have 15 years of experience in working in sexual violence prevention and response, particularly involving young people on the front lines and in advocacy. And I now direct a research program called COSPER on children's online safety and privacy, where I investigate kind of political economy of this growing space of children's online safety. And actually, from the standpoint of child safety, this act fundamentally misdiagnoses what is harmful about online harms. So it's not just adults' privacy that's being compromised through this act, it's also young people's privacy and young people's safety. It really is a policy of digital abstinence.
So in what ways does it compromise children's and young people's privacy?
Yeah, so what we are seeing, and it's been several days since this act has been implemented, is the kind of just disparate effects of its implementation. So actually the kind of harmful content that the act defines, and it defines it into two camps, the primary priority content and the priority content. The primary priority content involves things like explicit pornography, content that encourages, promotes, or provides instructions on things like self-harm, eating disorder, and suicide. And for priority content, it includes bullying, abusive, and hateful content, things that depict serious violence and injury, and so on. And what we are seeing is that a lot of this is being applied to content actually involving things like what's happening in Palestine, and the content that it claims to be preventing from young people's access. And I actually just did a search before hopping on this interview on Reddit. So threads like Israel Exposed is blocked, but threads about sexualizing young schoolgirls, threads about pickup artists are still accessible. So very much the vague language of this act allows for this kind of selective interpretation that isn't even in the spirit of its stated intent.
And what about the impacts on adult privacy? So we've seen in the UK that there's been a massive upswing in the download of VPNs in order to allow adults to browse sites by declaring that they're in another geographic location and therefore bypassing the law. Does that create any privacy issues for those users?
We're absolutely seeing a skyrocketing of VPNs being downloaded. Proton VPN, for example, in the past several days have skyrocketed. And I think one of the unintended consequences as a result is that this is going to funnel users, both young people and old people, to more sites that have less safeguards that are available. If you can't be accessing your community or information from the Reddits and these, bigger companies, albeit with all their problems, they do have safeguards because they're better resourced. But instead, a lot of people are going to be flocking to smaller and less guarded sites.
So what do you think that the upshot of this act is going to be? So if it's not going to protect children and in fact it's only going to infringe on their privacy while also infringing on the privacy of adults, it doesn't seem in your view that there's any beneficiary to this act.
From the child protection sector, the argument is that this regulation is going to be protecting children, the universal children, from harmful content. But harmful content is really vaguely defined in a way that is clearly selectively being imposed on political dissent. And child safety in the interest of what? Child safety is also very poorly defined. So I think from both the standpoint of best interests of children and also from the standpoint of civil liberties for adults, this act doesn't really do much to protect either. And in fact, I would actually argue that it endangers all users, both young and old, because it bolsters the surveillance business model, the predatory business model that the tech industry has been relying on, which is to collect more information about us. In order for age verification to work, it implements a number of technologies, a lot of sensitive information, a lot of biometric information about us, behavioral data about us. So now platforms have even more treasure trove of data to collect and quantify and commercialize and monetize that in order to estimate about how old we are and determine what kind of digital experience that we're going to have. So this actually doesn't curb the powers of the tech industry. It actually gives them more. And it's also a pretext for the government to expand their surveillance.
I mean, it's interesting what you say there about the sort of surveillance structure, because one of the points that people make is that, small sites which may show some material which is deemed now to be unsafe for young people don't have the resources to put in place the identification or the verification infrastructure that's required. Whereas larger, big tech sites, which are already harvesting our data, now suddenly, it's easy for them. They can afford to put those things in place. And I guess that's where you're suggesting things can really go wrong for users of the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, actually both the small sites and big tech companies actually end up being losers as a result of this act, because big tech companies now they have to account for extra costs of working with third-party vendors that specialize in age verification, which is going to create more friction on user experience, which is not ideal for platform companies. And small sites that have a limited user base are also now going to have to invest additional resources or additional cost to be able to execute age verification. And for the rationale behind age verification is that by doing it, we're going to create a seamless experience where young people are protected and shielded from harmful content. But actually, what this act does and age verification does is by putting the onus of authentication on the end users. So we all know that we have consent fatigue from things like having to click through the cookies as a result of something like the GDPR. And, users are always complaining about how annoying it is when you visit a new website. If you're annoyed by that, it's only going to get worse, because now you have to jump through additional hoops to be able to access basic information about whether it's the news about what's happening or sexual health information or reproductive health information.
And what about political dissent? Do you see the act having an impact on, citizens of the UK, whatever their political beliefs, whether they're on the right or the left or somewhere in between, trying to organize against issues, the government, for example, that they disagree with?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, quote unquote harmful content, according to this act, is defined really poorly. And it includes things like pro-terror material, which is extremely poorly defined. So now that gives the government a pretext to apply it selectively. And we are seeing it being applied already. I believe on the day of the act, there was a protest in Seacroft, Leeds, that X had prevented access to. And we know from users sharing it that Reddit thread Israel Exposed has been restricted to users. So we're already seeing this kind of selective application of when the act kicks in.
But presumably you don't disagree with the idea that children accessing pornography, for example, or suicide promotion sites is something that we maybe should protect them from. I mean, just to give you a personal example, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I don't think she's accessing sites. I mean, I can't say for sure. I'm pretty sure she's not. But I do know that boys around her are. And I've been witness myself to a kind of level of sexual harassment that she's experienced from other 13 and 14-year-old boys who are clearly either getting it themselves via pornography or it's being communicated via access to those kinds of sites. So, it has an impact on people other than the people who are viewing that material. So, I mean, what do you say to someone like me, for example, who is concerned about young boys, especially accessing hardcore, violent, pornographic material?
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I share deep concerns, and absolutely something has to be done about the way that young people are taken advantage of, again, by the predatory businesses of the tech industry. But the first question I would ask is, how and why are young people being exposed to or accessing content like that? And when we start asking the questions about the complexity of young people, what we find is that they might be curious about sex because nobody around them is talking about it. Or they are truly being exposed, and often being exposed in websites that are already, have a higher threshold of harmful content. So in the first case, where young people are genuinely curious, to me, that's a symptom of something that we have collectively as adults failed to do. It means that they are not having that conversation with their parents. It means that they are not having that conversation in their school system. And that's no surprise, because under the austerity, we're seeing social services being cut left and right. Parent capacity is being reduced. Schools are not providing comprehensive sex education, especially in light of ongoing war on trans youth. So that is a symptom of a larger problem of how we are failing young people. And second, if we take that route of how are young people being exposed to harmful content, then we look at the digital ecosystem, and we have to contend with the fact that this is an advertising ecosystem. For example, in the UK Gambling Commission in the past year, they found that young people, about 64% of them are exposed to sports gambling sites pretty regularly. So we see something like these addictive behaviors and harmful content, sensationalist content that's either as a result of the attention economy that we have, or again, these advertisers, being able to share content without any kind of checks and balances to young people. And decades of research have shown that young people should not be exposed to targeted advertising. They should not be subject to algorithmic profiling. And yet these, systemic interventions are the things that I would love to see the Online Safety Act tackle, but instead they're interested in chasing the symptoms. If we remove the symptoms, the root causes still remain the same, which is the advertising, the surveillance business model. And this act doesn't do anything to actually address that.
That was Kate Sim of Children's Online Safety and Privacy Research speaking to me earlier today. And I mean, I tend to think that legislation is such a blunt tool. I mean, drugs are illegal, but kids still take them. Kids who want to find pornography are going to find pornography. Kids who want to find other harmful sites are going to find other harmful sites. And the things to tackle are the desires to do those things, not using legislation to sort of make yourself feel safe about it when you're not actually at all. Parents who suddenly think their kids won't be able to access websites are going to be incredibly shocked when they still manage to do so, because they'll have thought, oh, well, I've now that the government has seconded control for me and responsibility from me. And so, I don't need to worry so much. Now, the Online Safety Act has also created a political stir. On Monday, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage vowed to repeal Britain's, quote, dystopian Online Safety Act, saying its suppression of free speech would make Xi Jinping blush. Speaking online, Farage said this: "Millions of people have noticed what they're getting on their feeds is different to what it was just last week. It begins to look as though state suppression of genuine free speech may be upon us already." Now, the government's Secretary for Science and Technology, Peter Kyle, has responded, saying this:
I see that Nigel Farage is already saying that he's going to overturn these laws. So, we have people out there who are extreme pornographers, peddling hate, peddling violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake about it, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'd be perpetrating his crimes online. And Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side.
I'm sorry.
Not the side of children who are...
I'm going to ask you to clarify. Do you honestly think to say Nigel Farage is on Jimmy Savile's side?
When it comes to online activity, we have seen unfettered access of adults to children via social media. When we put in the age verification, it stops strange adults getting in touch with children. So make no mistake.
This is a major leap. You're going to stick to the fact that you said that Nigel Farage is on Jimmy Savile's side.
Nigel Farage is on the side of turning the clock back to the time when strange adults, strangers, can get in touch via messaging apps with children. We have now asked to age verify the age in which people can have access to online content, so we can protect children from unwanted, dangerous content, and also those messaging services where people can get access directly to it. Nigel Farage wants to turn the clock right back when all of that, I have absolutely no doubt about it, people are perpetrating more crime online, more danger to children online, and Nigel Farage has said he wants to overturn every single one of the laws that keeps children safe in our country.
Now, Peter Kyle repeated those comments on pretty much every TV show he turned up on, comparing Nigel Farage in some way to Jimmy Savile and also to the defender of hardcore pornographers. And obviously, Kyle was just really thrilled by how clever he thought those comments were. But this is how Nigel Farage described that attack.
Absolutely disgusting. Disgusting. To compare anybody's actions with the vile Jimmy Savile is completely below the belt. Yes, there's to and fro in politics. This was appalling. All I asked for was an apology, and he simply doubled down. And it's a disgrace. And I stand absolutely by what I've said, that children are not being protected. They're signing up for VPNs where they can access content that is even worse than they could have done before this instrument came in. And I'm also, people in glass houses, I mean, perhaps he should remember that his own leader, Keir Starmer, had to apologise for not prosecuting Jimmy Savile.
Now, it's pretty unusual for me to find myself on the side of Nigel Farage. I am suspicious that he's motivated by children's interests when he wants to repeal the Online Safety Act. But I think he's right. As I said earlier, I don't think this will actually protect children at all, particularly. But Kieran, just on the politics of this, was that comparison made by Peter Kyle a political own goal?
Just a short reflection from me on this one, Stephen. I think that kind of political hyperbole works a lot better when the person delivering it doesn't sound like somebody auditioning for sixth form debate society or something. And it's particularly painful listening to Peter Kyle. And I think it's obviously backfires or hasn't landed. Farage, Trump, their ilk know how to deliver that kind of hyperbole very, very well. Peter Kyle, less so. I dare say probably most of the Labour front bench, much, much less so. And maybe that says something about the kinds of audiences that they corral as well. Beyond that, I think politically, just one other brief observation, which is of interest, and it's kind of half-formed. It's half-baked for me. But it is interesting that Nigel Farage, has kind of taken up the political space of the Conservative Party. And you could argue some, obviously, aspects of Labour as well. But, he is a man of the right, right? And the political space that he is very rapidly, it seems, moving into is the space typically occupied by the right in this country. And of course, historically, you would expect the preeminent figure on the British political right to be very much on the side of the sort of moral panic, anti-pornography, moral panic kind of thing, and the kind of side of things. We've got a long tradition of that in this country. Mary Whitehouse, campaigner in the 1970s against pornography and television, she considered it all to be the work of the devil. There's a long, rich tradition in this country of kind of curtain-twitching social conservatism that sees the devil under every single bedstead and thinks that there's every new attitude in society is worthy of a moral panic. And actually, I think it is interesting. And I said it's half-formed because I don't exactly know what it means. People listening, viewing might have a view, might not. I don't know what it means that the kind of preeminent figure on the British right at the moment is actually taking the more kind of libertarian stance on it all, and not the kind of traditional social conservative position on it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about libertarianism and Farage because, in the absence of a kind of libertarian left party, Farage has also been able to claim the kind of libertarianism, the kind of like quest for freedom that is common to a lot of people who don't want to be inhibited by the state, who don't want the state to be controlling their social and their communal activities. Many of them are on the left, and or maybe they don't have a political home necessarily, but they do believe in a sort of freedom. And Farage has managed to capture quite a lot of them because there hasn't been an answer on the left, which also engages in a kind of libertarianism, a kind of suspicion of corporations and the state and what they can do when they join together, and which makes me all the more hopeful for the new left party. I think there's fertile ground for them to claim on this very topic of a kind of libertarian approach to the state.